Will be in order. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, to suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 307, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 307, an act to reauthorize certain programs under the Public Health Service Act and the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act with respect to public health security and all hazards preparedness and response and for other purposes. Senate amendment.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
This is a 15-minute vote here in the House, needs a two-thirds majority to pass. And while members are voting and coming to the House floor, we'll take a look now at some of the continuing resolution that will be undertaken this week in the House. It's meant to keep the government funded for the last 6 months of this budget year. Again, current funding runs out on March 27th, and a bill to fund the government for the rest of the year expected to come up for debate and votes later in the week. And earlier we talked to a Capitol Hill reporter about a continuing resolution. We're just having some technical problems with that interview. We'll try to fix those and show you that interview again in just a little bit. The House in a vote considering H.R. 307, which reauthorizes federal programs to aid in disaster preparedness and response. And while this vote is underway, we'll take a look at President Obama's new picks for his cabinet. He's chosen 2 former Clinton administration officials for new posts in his second term. They include MIT physics professor Ernest Moniz to be Energy Secretary and Walmart Foundation President Sylvia Matthews Burwell to be the White House Budget Director. The president also nominated current Environmental Protection Agency official Gina McCarthy to head that agency.
On this vote, the yeas are 370, the nays are 28. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the Senate amendment is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. I have enclosed copies of the resolutions adopted by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure on February 28, 2013. Pursuant to Section 3307 of Title 40 United States Code, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure met in open session to consider resolutions to authorize 16 lease prospectuses, including in the General Services Administration's FY 2012 and FY 2013 capital investment and leasing programs, and 2 resolutions to authorize alternation projects for space consolidations and exigent needs. Our committee continues to work to cut waste and the cost of federal property and leases. The resolutions approved by the committee will save the taxpayer $27.6 million annually, or $357 million over the terms of the leases. These resolutions ensure savings through lower rents, shrinking the space requirements of agencies, and efficiencies created through consolidation. In addition, the committee has included space utilization requirements in each of the resolutions to ensure agencies are held to appropriate utilization rates. Signed sincerely, Bill Schuster, Chairman.
Referred to the Committee on Appropriations. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor. The Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I am a proud supporter of the right to keep and bear arms. I'm appalled by the President's attempts to erode our constitutional freedoms and impress his will by executive order.
The gentleman will suspend. House will be in order. Members, please remove your conversations from the floor. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a proud supporter of the right to keep and bear arms. I am appalled by the President's attempts to erode our constitutional freedoms and impress his will by executive order. Our founding fathers would not have imagined that the right they listed second in the Bill of Rights, the right to bear arms, would be systematically attacked. My opposition to what the President has proposed is based on the fact that his plan is not only unconstitutional.
The gentleman will suspend. Members, please remove your conversations from the floor. Proceed. The gentleman will proceed.
May I start over? Mr. Speaker, I am a proud supporter of the right to keep and bear arms. I am appalled by the President's attempts to erode our constitutional freedoms and impress his will by executive order. Our founding fathers would not have imagined that the right they listed second in the Bill of Rights, the right to bear arms, would be systematically attacked. My opposition to what the President has proposed is based on the fact that his plan is not only unconstitutional, it is not effective. The federal government has tried a ban on these weapons before, and it did not work. The National Institute of Justice states that there has been no discernible reduction in the lethality and injuriousness of gun violence due to the 1994 assault weapons ban. Gun control laws do not make our communities safer. They do not take firearms from criminals, but rather from law-abiding citizens. Second, the phase assault weapons ban is a term of art. These are semi-automatic guns that essentially shoot the same kind of bullets as small game hunting rifles. Simply put, these are hunting rifles made to look like a military gun. Banning it for cosmetic reasons doesn't make sense and won't save any more lives. Third, banning large-capacity magazines will do little to stop criminals. Any gun that uses a magazine can use a magazine of any size. That's true of rifles and handguns. So-called assault weapons are not any different. In the end, if the President wants to begin a national dialogue about stopping violence, he shouldn't start by taking away our rights as citizens. I'm willing to work with the President and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to find a real solution to the challenges we face. But that solution will have to look at all the issues involved. But perhaps the most important part of the solution is restoring a culture of life in this country again.
Fired.
May God bless America. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, March 3, 2013, the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and other women's organizations led the reenactment of the historic Women's Suffrage March down Pennsylvania Avenue. In March 1913, Delta Sigma Theta's 22 founders engaged in their first public act by joining other women in a spirit of protest against the political organization of society from which women were excluded. While we have achieved a great deal in the last 100 years, it is quite evident that our journey is not complete. Women still deserve equal pay for equal work. Women deserve to control their own reproductive rights. We still have to fight for the rights of all Americans to participate in the electoral process. The struggle continues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank a teacher. Mr. Speaker, we have all seen that bumper sticker. I come from a family of teachers. My mother, mother-in-law, wife, and 3 of my 4 kids are teachers by profession. When a special little girl, Kara, was in the 3rd grade, she and her parents noticed her difficulty in processing words. Her speech pattern affected her self-esteem, her self-worth, and even her weight. Some kids made fun of her. Mrs. Morgan, the 3rd grade teacher, was determined to help the little girl speak better. With the hard work, the little girl and teacher overcame the word problem. The student graduated as high school valedictorian. She obtained her bachelor's and master's degrees. She also obtained a Ph.D. There is more. Today, that little girl received notice that she is tenured as an associate professor at Baylor University in the Department of English. For you see, Kara Poe Alexander, our daughter, the little girl that had trouble talking, has a Ph.D. in English rhetoric, the study of words. Congratulations, Kara, on being tenured faculty. And thank you, Mrs. Morgan, the teacher. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
80 years ago today, Frances Perkins was sworn in as Secretary of Labor. This is Women's History Month, and Frances Perkins certainly made history. She was the first woman member in the history of the United States to be part of the cabinet, and still holds the record as the longest-serving Secretary of Labor. She brought us the Fair Labor Standards, giving working women and men fair wages, limits on overtime, and the right to organize. She was the architect of the Social Security Act. Frances Perkins helped bring us out of the Great Depression, and as we come out of the Great Recession, we need to ask what Frances Perkins would do today. She would fight to raise the minimum wage. Almost 2/3 of all minimum wage workers are women. Many are the sole breadwinners for their families. She would defend Social Security against those who want to cut its very modest benefits. So today, we take time to remember Frances Perkins. Her message is still relevant today. Our nation is stronger if we give working women and men fair opportunities and treatment. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
The first high-profile shooting in modern history occurred in Stockton, California, where a gunman took the lives of 5 innocent children and injured 29 others. Robert Young, just 7 years old at that time, was one of the ones injured. He came up here last week to talk about gun control. This is part of his testimony. I remember what it sounded like as bullets flew past my body. I remember the feeling of my feet literally being swept out from underneath me, rounds traveling through my right foot. I remember the slap of the round that hit the pavement an inch in front of me prior to lodging itself inside the right side of my chest. Today, Robert's a law enforcement officer in the state of California. He came to Washington not to urge Congress to pass more gun control, but to extort this body to protect the Second Amendment. In 22 years prior to the 1990 federally acted Gun Controlled School Zone Act, there were only 2 mass shootings on schools and university campus. Now, 22 years since then, there have been 10, a 5-fold increase. Not only has this gun-free school zones proven not to be gun-free, they appear to place our children in even greater danger. This time has come to end this very deadly experiment, disarming law-abiding citizens. That's why I introduced H.R. 35, Safe Schools Act, to repeal this deadly so-called gun-free school zones. Law-abiding adults, including parents, teachers, and administrators, who are allowed in their states to carry firearms should not be required to be disarmed. Our children are too precious to be turned into unprotected soft targets for dangerous people. Passing the Safe Schools Act is the first step. And I might point out also, Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Maryland seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in recognition of March as Women's History Month and to commemorate the legacy of Jeannette Rankin, the first elected woman to serve in the House of Representatives on this day, March 4, 1917. Jeannette Rankin furthered women's rights, ensuring universal suffrage and protecting the poor. She began her career as a community organizer, working in low-income neighborhoods in San Francisco, New York, and Washington State. And she witnessed the troubles of women and single mothers living in these communities. Jeannette Rankin became a strong natural advocate for giving women a national voice through the right to vote. Remarkably, Jeannette Rankin was elected to Congress when women still did not have the right to vote. The 19th Amendment only passed 3 months after she left Congress. As Rankin herself put it, we're half the people, we should be half the Congress. And so today, as we continue to honor her work and legacy, and with this ongoing budget crisis in mind, it's imperative that we redouble our efforts, as she would have, to come to a solution and to take the lesson of Jeannette Rankin to fight for women and the poor who are disproportionately affected by sequestration, and to fight for them as Jeannette Rankin fought for them so hard. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Seek permission to speak for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, climate's changing. Climate change is very, very real. You only have to look at the superstorms we've had, Sandy and others, and the $180 billion of destruction that has been wrought upon us from the environment just over the last 2 years. Climate's changing. There's something we can do about it. In fact, there's something this House of Representatives must do about it, and that is to move forcefully, directly, and aggressively to clean energy policies. We ought to be subsidizing those clean energy systems that are out there, solar and wind. In my own district, in Solano County, we have one of the biggest wind farms. My own history in this goes back to 1978 when I authored legislation for state tax credits. We can and we must deal with climate change, and we can do it with clean energy policies. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to Mitchell Marcus, Jonathan Montañez, and the Franklin and Coronado High School basketball teams in El Paso, Texas. Few teams have a more contentious rivalry than these two, who compete to claim the title Pride of the West Side. So it was a hometown sports miracle when these rivals came together last month to support Mitchell Marcus, a special needs student who is a Coronado basketball team manager. With 90 seconds left in the season's final game, Coach Peter Morales put Mitchell in the game to fulfill his dream of making a basket. However, after a few missed shots, Mitchell's opportunity seemed lost. But with seconds left in the game, rival Franklin player Jonathan Montañez passed the ball to Mitchell, and he scored the final basket as the clock hit 0. Fans stormed the court to carry Mitchell on their shoulders, chanting his name. It is a moment now famous in El Paso and around the world because it shows that character and compassion can transcend even the bitterest rivalries. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the life and legacy of Sergeant Gary Morales, who was laid to rest today after being killed in the line of duty at the age of 35 on last Thursday in Fort Pierce, Florida. Sergeant Morales was a 12-year veteran with the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office and also proudly served our country as a member of the United States Air Force. There has been an outpouring of support in the wake of the shooting, with the community coming together to support his wife Holly and their 2 young daughters, Brooklyn and Jordan. The community has also come together to share fond memories of a man that everyone remembers as being an outstanding officer with a bright future and someone who always went above and beyond to help others. It is clear that Sergeant Morales not only dedicated his life to service, but was a true leader and a selfless hero. Mr. Speaker, Sergeant Gary Morales dedicated his life to serving his community and his country. I extend my most heartfelt condolences to the Morales family and his extended family at the Sheriff's Office during these most difficult times. I am humbled to recognize him here today. I yield the balance of my time.
The Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Culberson of Texas for today, Mr. Honda of California for today, and Mr. Young of Alaska for Monday, February 25th through Thursday, March 7th.
Without objections, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messer, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as part of the second in a series of special orders put on by the newly elected freshman Republican caucus. Our first was on spending. Today we rise to speak on the Second Amendment. I have participated in the first 50 days of my service here in this chamber in 19 public events throughout the 6th District of Indiana. Coffees, meetings with constituents, the public, folks who vote to send us here. And I can tell you in every one of those events, people have 2 topics top of mind. They're focused on spending, they're focused on the sequester, they're tired of the federal government that continues to spend money that we don't have, and they want the government to follow the principles that every American family does, which is you don't spend money unless you have money to spend. But the second topic that I hear everywhere that I go is the Second Amendment and the importance of making sure that that bedrock principle of American liberty is protected. We all know the tragic events that have occurred in recent months here in America, obviously the Connecticut tragedy being foremost top of mind. And I want to make clear in my comments, as I do all throughout my district, that as a nation we are heartbroken by tragedies like that when they occur. As a nation we mourn and weep with the families that had to deal with those tragedies. But as sad and tragic as those circumstances are, we cannot allow those events to be an excuse to undercut the Second Amendment and all that it means for liberty in this nation. There are opportunities to make a difference for public safety in this debate. It is time for a national conversation about mental health, because the common denominator in every one of these crimes is that the perpetrator is someone who is mentally ill. There are opportunities to do more on school security, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work through those as we move forward. But this much must be made clear. Gun bans don't work. They are only effective at preventing law-abiding citizens from having guns, because the criminals and mentally deranged that commit these crimes don't care about the fact that there's a law that would have them not have a gun. To blame a gun for a crime is to blame a pen for a misspelled word. And I look forward to the opportunity and dialoguing with my colleagues today on this important topic. I appreciate Congressman Stockman and Congressman Williams for their comments just a few minutes ago. I want to recognize the gentleman from Utah to step forward and give comments on this important topic.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Indiana for yielding his time. I had the great blessing of growing up on a family farm. I know what it's like as a kid to be so excited to go hunting with my brothers and with my father that you can't sleep the night before. I also had the great privilege of serving for 14 years as a pilot and an officer in the United States Air Force. There I learned a little bit about defending our nation through an adequate show of force. I also, by the way, qualified as an expert marksman in small arms. Recent and saddening events of violence have brought conversations about guns to the national stage. These acts of violence, as terrible as they are, should not be used by the White House as justification to revoke the rights outlined in our Constitution. The Second Amendment clearly states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Our founding fathers created this amendment to protect the citizens from government tyranny. In 2008, the Supreme Court emphatically stated that the right to bear arms is an individual right. Today, it continues to assure Americans' right to defend themselves against the evil in the world. Based on a survey, as recently as 2000, U.S. civilians do use guns to protect themselves and others from crime at least 990,000 times a year, almost 1 million times a year. It's critical that we continue to protect this personal and absolute right. And while gun-related violence is indeed tragic, and we all know that it is, as my friend, the gentleman from Indiana, has so eloquently stated, we bleed for those who suffer from this. It's important to note that it only accounts for a small portion of the violent crimes that are committed in the United States. As an example, the U.S. Department of Justice has said that of the roughly 5 million violent crimes committed in the United States during 2008, only 8% were committed by offenders who visibly were armed with a gun. Most of those crimes were committed with guns that were already illegal. Even the U.S. Justice Department conducted a survey in the 1990s that found that approximately 79% of the state prison inmates that carried a firearm during an offense that sent them to jail received their gun either through an illegal source or from one of their friends or family. Stricter laws to ban guns will not solve any of these problems. We already have many laws in place. But instead of creating new and harsher laws, we need to do a better job of enforcing the gun laws that we currently have. And finally, let me say this. I believe that the timing of this proposal and these bills, it just isn't right. At a time when sequestration just went into effect and our country is on a path towards bankruptcy, it's unacceptable that the White House continues to push its gun control agenda. We need to be focusing on getting our country back on a path of fiscal sanity. We need the President and his administration to show leadership. We need to ensure that America maintains its leadership role in the world. To do that, we need to budget and to spend responsibly. We need to replace President Obama's sequester, and it is this President's sequester, with common sense spending and spending cuts and reforms. And most importantly, we need the President to demonstrate an understanding of the nation's need to balance our budget and get us back on a path towards fiscal sanity. That is the great fight of our day. That is the great challenge that we are facing. My heart bleeds for the victims of gun violence, whether they're in Newtown or in New York or in my home district. But the President's proposals will not help. They aren't designed to address the core problems of mental health or a culture that is steeped in violence. Violence that is thrust upon our children through a media that is bent upon making more money through the violence they propagate. Mr. Speaker, let's concentrate our attention on the greatest challenge of our day, not on a band-aid of additional laws that are designed to do nothing but to make some liberals feel better. And to the gentleman of Indiana, I yield back my time and thank you for this opportunity to address the House.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments, gentleman from Utah. As we consider the tragedy that occurred in Newtown, Connecticut, it is natural to want to do something to prevent that from ever happening again. The victims of such unthinkable crimes deserve our solemn prayers for their loss and our deepest sympathy for their pain. The perpetrators of this evil deserve justice such evils deserve justice for their crimes. The problem, however, is that the President and other opponents of the Second Amendment are seeking to limit our constitutional rights by pitching Americans a false sense of security, that by taking away rights, somehow those who intend to do harm will not do so. History shows that gun bans only keep guns away from law-abiding citizens, not criminals. Those who want to build, modify, or acquire weapons for violence will do so. I recognize the gentleman for Florida for as much time as he will consume on this important topic.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Indiana for your time. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to rise here today. Mr. Speaker, I rise to address this body tonight about a subject that weighs heavy on the minds of many constituents and many Americans. It is a subject and right that has been granted to us by our country's founding principles, the Constitution, not by government. It is a birthright of any law-abiding citizen of the United States of America, and it is their choice to exercise that right. It is the role and duty of government to protect those rights. In my 2 months as their representatives, more people in the 3rd District of Florida have reached out to me with their concerns over how Congress will address our Second Amendment after the much publicized tragic event at Newtown, Connecticut. This indeed, I think we all agree, was a senseless act of violence. This is not a time to make a knee-jerk reaction and challenge our Second Amendment and restrict our rights as law-abiding citizens. This is not a time to play partisan politics. This is a time to come together. This is a time to go after the cause of this despicable act, the individual, and the cause of gun violence. I stand 100% with President Obama and all others that want to curb gun violence, so long as it does not interfere with our Second Amendment. The Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is necessary to protect the Third Amendment. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner prescribed by law. Those who commit the unspeakable crime we've witnessed a few months ago should not be able to hide behind any amendment or law in this country. But the real issue is gun violence, not the gun. We must be vigilant in using the laws already available to the fullest extent possible and look at why people are doing these crimes before we punish or infringe upon the rights of the law-abiding individual. We should look more at causes of mental health issues that lead to these crimes. This point is illustrated by the Department of Justice's own internal memo that we're discussing tonight, which notes that the greatest number of guns used in crime comes from straw purchases, that being purchased by someone for someone else or by theft of a gun, not by the person that abides by the law. Laws that place even more restrictions on law-abiding citizens who only want the right to own a gun for any legal activity they determine will not deter the person intent on doing harm. People with bad habits tend to do bad things. The first week of this Congress, I joined my colleagues here on the House floor in reading of our Constitution. We took an oath at that swearing-in ceremony to uphold the Constitution. I carry a copy of our Constitution with me everywhere I go. Any and all we do in this body and our colleagues in the Senate should be done to uphold, to protect, and to strengthen this document. And by doing this, we strengthen America. Our Constitution has set America apart from every other country in the world, and I aim to keep it that way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the remaining part of my time. Thank you.
Thanks again to the gentleman from Florida. I appreciate your comments today. Thank my colleague from Utah and my colleagues from Texas who had the opportunity to speak earlier. And I appreciate your leadership on this important topic. Obviously, we face many challenges as a nation. The Second Amendment is one of them, but an important one. Clearly, we all want to prevent horrible tragedies similar to the loss of those young lives in Newtown, Connecticut. But gun bans and many of the other proposals from this president are not the answer. For example, an internal memo from the Justice Department said that the universal background checks proposed by this president will only be effective if paired with required gun registration, a list of law-abiding citizens who simply exercise their constitutional right to own a firearm. This is a blatant intrusion of privacy, and it cannot be allowed. We need real solutions that aim to identify, treat, or limit access to the evil few who perpetrate these horrible acts. I am unwilling to turn my back on the Constitution and sacrifice the liberty of the people I represent for a false sense of security. We need real solutions, and despite our disagreements, there are opportunities to work together. As I mentioned earlier, blaming a gun for violence is to blame a pen for a misspelled word. If we can come together and focus on the real causes of this violence, then there are opportunities to work together. And I stand ready to work with every member of this chamber, regardless of party, to move this country forward. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent that all members be given 5 days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
I also, Mr. Speaker, ask for unanimous consent that a statement be entered into the record submitted by the Honorable Eddie Bernice Johnson, the gentlelady from Texas.
The The gentleman's request will be covered by General Leave.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, it's my honor and my privilege to stand here today as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus to participate one more time as an anchor for the CBC special order today on the subject of the impact of sequestration on the American people. As we know, on Friday, the sequestration took effect, automatic spending cuts of a significant, painful amount that will be experienced by the American people all across the land. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, it's something that was avoidable had there been a willingness to try and find common ground. There are many of us who believe that the most appropriate approach would have been to try and find a balanced resolution involving tax reform and revenue and attempting to identify where reasonable spending adjustments could have been made. But instead of all parties trying to come together to find a balanced resolution to the problem that we find ourselves in, there are some in this chamber who seem committed to trying to balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable in our society, balancing the budget on the backs of children and seniors, pregnant women, Superstorm Sandy victims, public housing residents, our national security. And so I'm just hopeful that as we move forward, that we can find the capacity, find the ability, find the courage to come together to seek out common ground so we can resolve this sequestration matter and move forward supporting the economy in the manner that will be the healthiest for the greatest number of Americans possible. I'm pleased today that we've been joined by several distinguished members of the Congressional Black Caucus, including the chairperson of the CBC, the Honorable Marcia Fudge, who's been a tremendous leader on so many issues on behalf of working families and the middle class and seniors all across this country, and I yield to her as much time as she shall consume.
Thank you so very much. I thank the gentleman for yielding.